Good day everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Mariette, also known as the Boervrou, and I'm coming to you from South Africa. So in today's video I'm going to share my tips for beginner sock knitters. So I made some notes so that I can keep on track. My first tip will be start by knitting socks for yourself. So the reason I would suggest knitting socks for yourself is because you can determine what you want to know best. So for instance, if you want to know how the sock fits, how it feels around the foot, it is easier for you to decide what you feel. So if you knit a sock for yourself, you can determine, is it tight enough? Is it short enough? Is it long enough? Is there enough space? Is there too much space? So that you can adjust all of these things for yourself. In my experience, if you knit a sock, the first sock for someone else, they might say, oh, the sock is fitting nicely, but in actual fact, it might be a little loose. So it is best to knit for yourself first so that you can determine what you like and get more of a feel of what is good for you on how to knit a sock. My second tip is that one that lots of people don't like to hear about, but gauge is important. So I would suggest to not knit a gauge swatch as you normally would, but to knit a gauge sock rather. And what I mean by this is if you have a pattern and for instance your foot circumference suggests the medium size of knitting a 60 stitch sock, I would take the needles that you're going to use to knit the sock with and the yarn that you're going to knit the sock with and cast on 60 stitches and knit a sock tube basically of at least 5 centimeters. And then you can take this sock tube and put it onto waste yarn. It's not necessary that you cast it off or bind it off, and fit it on your foot. Feel, is it very tight going over your foot? Is it very tight going over your heel? Is it much too loose around your leg? Is it too tight around your leg? And then determine from there what next steps you should take. So let's say you made a 60 stitch sock. It feels very nice over your foot, very nice over your leg. I would also suggest in washing that swatch. That's why I said leave it on some waste yarn and put it into some soapy water, let it sit for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then you just do as you normally would with a swatch. Rinse it out, put it in between a towel and press out the excess water and then leave it to dry. And please remember to always let it dry completely before trying to fit it again. You can also, for record, measure your gauge, the stitches as well as the rows. I know a 5 centimeter tube wouldn't give you the row gauge for a 10 centimeter, but just for more or less so that you have an idea at what gauge you knit at. Also remember that knitting socks is not a thing that it has to be the same for everyone. Everybody is different and everyone is shaped in a different way. Some people can wear different types of heels and other people it just does not work. And you might, like me, have a smaller foot circumference towards your leg circumference, and you might have to adjust your sock size according to what your body is shaped like. So for instance, you might need a 60 stitch sock for your foot, but you might need a 68 stitch sock for your leg. And in knitting your own socks, you can achieve this by if you are knitting top down, you can decrease before the heel and then do a 60 stitch sock for the foot part of your sock. And if you do toe up, you can knit a 60 stitch sock, and just after you have finished your heel, you can increase to 68 stitches for the leg part. So that is the great thing about knitting socks for yourself. You learn all of these little tips and tricks on how to get the perfect fit for you. And that is also still why I suggested start by knitting for yourself. All right, my third tip is that needles is important. So needles is important. What do I mean by that? It is not, I'm not talking about cheaper brands versus more expensive brands. I'm specifically talking about the material of what your needles are made of. I started learning knitting socks. My first was on aluminium coated DPNs, and I don't like DPNs, but nevertheless I started with that, and I took the same stitch counts and I started with bamboo needles on Magic Loop, and I knit quite a few pairs of socks with bamboo needles, and then I changed to stainless steel needles, and that made a huge difference in my knitting gauge. And I had to eventually go down one needle size from 2.5 to 2.25 to achieve a proper gauge. Now, at this stage, if I knit socks on 2.5 millimeter needles, they are much bigger than the 2.25. And I started with 2.5, but it might be the material of my knitting needles that is bringing this change in gauge. The other thing as well is that your gauge can change with the method that you are knitting. So for instance, you might get a great fitting sock with 60 stitches on Magic Loop, and then when you change to 9-inch circulars, you might hold the needles different, and you might tighten up your gauge or loosen your gauge, and you will have to adjust for that by going up or down a needle size, or going up or down a sock stitch size. I mean, that is something that you can do as well. If you like the fabric that you get with those needles in that gauge, then adjust the stitch count for what you would like to have. My fourth tip will be always make notes. Get yourself a little notebook, a project journal, whatever works for you, and make some notes every time you knit a sock for yourself, and what you found with this method that you used, because in that manner you always have the information at hand, and you would not necessarily make the same mistakes twice, because there is so many techniques, you might forget that you already tried this. And then to end this video off, I wanted to say that you must also remember that your gauge may change over time when you get more confident in knitting socks. So what worked 5 years ago might not work for you anymore today. But if you keep notes, you would see this change happening gradually over time. And always remember that you can unravel the sock again and just redo it with the knowledge that you now have. Try out some new techniques, and always do and stick to what works for you. There is no rule that says socks has to be knit on DPNs or has to be knit on 9-inch circulars. You do you, and remember to enjoy the craft that you chose as part of this relaxing journey. Right, and as I said, if a sock does not fit you, just rip it out and try again. You will succeed in the end, and you can do it. So thank you so much for watching this little tips video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see any more of my content. And I will see you in the next one. Until next time, happy crafting. Bye.